The people in Hollow's End must really like Halloween, I thought to myself as I turned onto my street. Pumpkins and giant skeletons and all sorts of other, more peculiar decorations covered the houses on Night Soil Avenue. But that holiday wasn't even close yet, was it? The last few weeks had been a blur. I had just finished moving into the house when I had my accident. But I was sure I still had time to decorate and get some candy for the kids. I figured I would go out the following day and buy some things from the store on Main Street. Fake cobwebs and paper witches, plastic pumpkins and ghosts, and not to mention copious amounts of candy. Enough for the kids, but also enough for me to have a good snack while I watched movies between knocks at the door. Little did I know, I would never get the chance. That evening, my life would change forever. And the strangeness all started with a phone call. I had just gotten home from the pharmacy, and I'd barely had time to sit down when the phone began to ring from my pocket. Unknown number, the caller ID read. Usually I wouldn't pick up a call like that. But the hospital's number showed up as private when they called, so I thought maybe it was them. "Hello?" I said, cautiously. "Hi," an enthusiastic voice boomed back at me. "Is this Sam Brooke?" "Yes," I answered, again with a bit of nervousness, waiting to see who it was before I proceeded further. "Who's calling, please?" "I'm calling from the campaign of..." The phone cut out momentarily, turning into static. "Are you still there, sir?" I considered hanging up on them, but figured I'd be polite. This was probably just some volunteer who was giving their time in hopes of bettering their community. Even if I didn't want to support their candidate, I would let them go gently. "I'm here. I missed what you said there. Can you repeat that?" "Certainly. I said I'm calling from the campaign of Grothrock, Destroyer of Worlds, the Endless One, Keeper of the Hollow Blackness of the Void." My heart skipped a beat in my chest, and I almost dropped the phone. More out of instinct than anything else, I said, "I'm sorry, what?" "Will you support the Void? Will you drown in the cold of its endless embrace as you scream and suffer for all eternity?" I hung up the phone before they could say any more. Clearly, it was some horrible prank call. But wow, it felt so real at the beginning. They had really made me think they were calling from a political campaign. My heart still pounding, my hands shaky, I put the phone on Do Not Disturb mode and put it face down on the table. No more picking that up for a while, I told myself. As I sat there, trying to calm myself down, I began to hear a rhythmic knocking coming from somewhere. At first, I thought it was the front door, but then I realized with a shock that it was coming from somewhere inside the house. The knocking was quiet, almost polite at first, but soon it increased in its volume and urgency, until it was a steady pounding. Like two fists crashing against a brick wall, the old dry mortar crumbling and raining to the floor with each blow. As that noise continued, it became clear to me where it was coming from. The basement. There was a door down there which I had found particularly creepy when I was looking at this old house. It was in the far back left corner of the basement, and looked as if it led outside. Except, the real estate agent told me, it had been bricked up. Like something from an Edgar Allan Poe story, when I had pulled open the door with her beside me that day, I was greeted by a solid wall of gray brick. I remember wondering who, or what, might be behind those bricks. Poor Fortunato? Or something else, less human. As if in a trance, I found myself shuffling down the stairs of the basement, the light on my phone cutting a beam through the solid darkness down there, revealing dust motes and spiders clinging to silken strands of webbing. The pounding noise was steadily growing louder. But when I got down there and began to step softly towards that door, the sound stopped completely. A moment later, it was as if it had never happened at all. I approached the door, my heart still thrumming in my chest, and pulled it open. The bricks were still there, solid and intact. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief and began to close it again. But then I noticed the flaking mortar and crumbling brick on the floor. Signs of damage. Signs that what I had heard had been very, very real. I closed the door, my hand trembling, and as soon as it latched shut, one more final loud boom shook the house, as if a giant were on the other side of that door, trying to get out. I backed away, nearly tripping over my feet, and hurried up the stairs. It was probably just some old machinery, or the house settling, or... I tried to rationalize it, but couldn't. So, instead, I tucked that horrifying thought into the back corner of my mind, bricking it up and closing the door on the memory. I couldn't think about that right now. I couldn't think of it or my mind would snap like a dry twig. I was sure of it. But I was just as sure that I could figure out a rational explanation to it. I would just ask the realtor about it, and surely she would just have some calm, sensible response to my question of what was behind that door. And then it would all be okay again. It was getting dark outside, I noticed when I re-entered the main level from the basement, and my stomach was rumbling with hunger, despite the fright I just felt. I decided to go make myself dinner, and made do with ramen noodles and a fried egg, since there wasn't much in the fridge. I was listening to music, attempting to flip my egg without breaking the yolk, when the doorbell rang. The music was loud, so it drowned out the sound of voices, but I could still hear them vaguely, and it sounded like they were singing just outside my door. High, lilting voices singing some old, familiar tune. What the hell? I said out loud, turning off the stove and setting the frying pan off the burner. I stood there for a few seconds, listening for it again, but there was nothing. After a little while, I made it to the door, opened it, but found no one there. I could hear voices a little ways off in the distance, but didn't see anyone in the street or near the house. Closing the door, this time I drew the chain as well as locking it with the deadbolt. I looked out the small window at the top of the door, giving the neighborhood one final glance. And when I did, I saw something that made my throat close up with panic. Across the street, there was a figure now standing there, dressed in a long, flowing black robe. And they were staring at my house. I wasn't sure, but in the flickering light of the street, I thought there was something wrong with their face. It was too pale, and... I sat down with my back against the door, breathing heavily, my heart pounding. Whoever that was did not look normal. And who the hell wears a long black robe? And not only that, his face had been pale, his eyes red, and, worst of all, I could have sworn I'd seen blood smeared around the corners of his mouth. I checked my pocket for my phone, but it was gone. I looked around for it, thinking maybe I would call the police, but I couldn't find it anywhere. It was like it had just vanished. I went back into the kitchen, trying to settle myself down. Whatever was happening could be explained rationally, just like the pounding in the basement. I just needed to calm down and stop freaking out. I took several deep breaths and told myself it was just my imagination. It had just been some guy with a weird fashion sense standing in the street. Nothing more. My leg was aching with pain from all the movement, so I threw together the eggs and ramen in a bowl and proceeded upstairs to eat in my room. There was a television up there, and it felt more secluded and isolated from the madness I'd been experiencing so far tonight. When I got up there, the doorbell began to ring again, and again, and again. I told myself to just ignore it. They would go away. They had to go away. Whoever they were. I sat on my bed, sweat running down the sides of my face and dampening my armpits, and turned on the television. And sure enough, the ringing stopped. My heart was still pounding, but at least it was peaceful and quiet once again, except for the noise of the TV. After eating my ramen, I set the bowl on my desk and chanced to look out the window. What I saw out there made my blood run cold. There wasn't just one creepy-looking man standing out there. The street was now filled with nightmarish figures. A tragic mermaid, creatures covered in fur with sharp teeth, others with writhing tentacles and slimy skin. Not only that, an enormous furry creature with glowing red eyes was crawling on the house next door, and I heard screams of terror coming from that direction. And worst of all, the man in the flowing black robe was still standing there across the street, staring up at me, looking directly at me now. This time, there was no mistaking it. There was fresh, wet blood dribbling down his chin, dripping onto his shirt. No, 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 I was muttering, backing away from the window, when the doorbell began to ring again. There was a hammering, pounding fist rapping against it a second later, and I climbed under the bed to hide there. I could have sworn I heard the demon creature singing in high voices, as if gleeful at my impending demise. They were just toying with me now, and I was sure they would break the glass and swarm into my house any minute. I huddled under the bed, waiting. At one point, I crawled out from under the bed to grab a baseball bat from my closet, then decided to hide in there instead, piling up shoes in front of myself and ducking behind old coats for hours, terrified. When I chanced another look out, after such a long time, I saw that the enormous spider was now wrapping my house up in a thick web. I could hear its footsteps on the roof as well, probing the attic for weak points. Soon it would find its way in through my bedroom window, I was sure. They were still toying with me, it seemed, but at some point they would come for me, whatever these creatures were. As I sat huddled in the closet, I tried to determine what had happened. How had I arrived in this terrible place? Or was my own neighborhood being invaded by these things? I decided, after some deliberation, that there was only one answer. My entire house had been somehow teleported to another world, another dimension populated by nightmarish creatures and giant, terrifying tarantulas. And that thing, pounding on my basement wall, trying to get in. I'm not sure when I fell asleep or how, but it was after several more hours of hiding in the darkness of the closet, and it was only for what felt like a few minutes. The noises had long since quieted, and the spider never did manage to find its way in. I slowly got out from under the bed, emboldened by the dull light of dawn streaming in through the bedroom window. My head was still clearing from what felt like a terrible nightmare. My leg was aching worse than ever, the still healing fracture underneath my cab throbbing an angry electric shock with each heartbeat. Moving made it worse, and I realized I desperately needed my pain medication. I had injured my leg a few weeks prior, and it was still mending. Before I could get to my pain medication, I looked out the window. And when I did, I was stunned into silence for several long seconds. With sober eyes, I saw it all clearly. Toilet paper hung from the eaves and from the tree on my front lawn. What I had thought was webbing was actually nothing more than tissue paper. And the giant spider on the neighbor's house? It was actually an elaborate Halloween decoration which they had apparently assembled at the last minute. Of course, I thought to myself, letting out a sigh of relief. I actually chuckled at my own stupidity. The night before had been Halloween. That explained everything. The figures outside who looked like monsters were just trick-or-treaters. And the man in the black, flowing robe who looked like he had blood dribbling down his chin, he was just a parent dressed as a vampire. It all made sense now, and I felt like a complete idiot for spending the night hiding in the closet. When I reached the bottle of pills I'd brought home from the pharmacy, things began to make even more sense. The hospital had told me I was sensitive to morphine, so they had avoided giving it to me during my time there. I had just been discharged after a few weeks in the joint, and the doctor who sent me on my way apparently didn't get the message that I was sticking to Tylenol. He had prescribed me the hard stuff, and, stupid me, I took it without reading the label. The nurses in the hospital had told me I was hallucinating on that stuff, and was borderline delirious when I had been given opioids in the ER, seeing monsters and other impossible things. And honestly, I barely remembered my time there. It was like a bad dream. A little bit like last night. I took out a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol I had in the cupboard and swallowed 2 of them dry. I could deal with the pain, but not those hallucinations. My phone was lying face down on the coffee table, just where I'd left it the night before. Again, I kicked myself for my stupidity, It was the same black color as my table, and had blended in so that I hadn't seen it in the state I was in. I looked to see several missed calls, one of them from my neighbor. He wanted to know if I was okay, since I wasn't answering my door and no one had seen me for a few weeks until tonight. Not to mention the fact that I was looking out my window, appearing sick and terrified at the sight of trick-or-treaters. Time really flies in the hospital, I told him on the phone. And sometimes weeks can go by without realizing it's happened. I had no idea it was Halloween already, even before I took those pills. Although, if I'd been in my right mind, I'm sure I would have pieced it together. "Sorry about all the toilet paper on your house," my neighbor said apologetically. "I'll grab my ladder and take it down for you. I gotta take down that damn mechanical spider anyways. Stupid thing gets caught in the wind, that's why we put it up last minute. I know it was a bit much, but the kids really seemed to enjoy it. I hope it didn't scare you." He said this last with a chuckle, and I didn't have the guts to tell him that it had, indeed, scared the shit out of me. Darren told me he was a robotics engineer, and he liked to build displays every Christmas and Halloween. Ones that moved and looked surprisingly realistic. Scared? Of course not. I tried to bluff him. Just a Halloween decoration. "Just kidding, buddy," he said. "Man, those kids must have really had it out for you after you didn't answer your door last night. Must have climbed all over your roof to write that message in toilet paper." What does it say?" I asked, thinking back to the footsteps overhead the night prior. Not a giant spider after all. Nothing but naughty kids, pissed off they didn't get any candy from the new cheapskate on Night Soil Avenue. "You don't want to know," he chuckled. "Hang on, Darren. I'll have to call you back. I'm getting another call," I said, looking down to see unknown number once again. "Thanks again, man. I owe you big time." "All good, buddy. Just focus on getting healed up, okay? I'll talk to you later," he said, hanging up. I picked up the other call. It was the same voice as the night before, which caused my heart to skip a beat. "Hello, I'm calling from the campaign of..." The phone cut out for a second, and all I heard was static. And I had a flashback to the night before. "Hello, are you there?" "I'm here," I said, gulping. "How can I help you?" After what felt like a very long pause, he continued. "I said I'm calling from the campaign of Walter Worfman. He's running for councilor in your district, and we're hoping we can count on your vote." I breathed a sigh of relief. I do take local elections seriously, so I'd be curious to hear what his platform is, I said. "Do you have a website?" "Of course. It's right here. Do you have a pen or something to write with?" Yeah, I said, putting the phone on speaker and pulling up my notepad app. "Go ahead." "Okay, so it's www.grothrockdestroyerofworlds.com. He is the Endless One, keeper of the void. Drown in the cold of its endless embrace as you scream and suffer for all eternity." I hung up the phone with shaking hands, throwing it against the far wall of the room. The horrible voice continued to pour out from it, despite the lack of any connection. As the warbling, distorted voice continued to speak of horrible, terrifying things which were coming for me, to consume me, the pounding on the door in the basement began again. This time, much, much louder. "Grothrock is there now. You should speak to him. You should listen to his platform," said the voice on the phone from across the room. "He will bring endless suffering and pain, and his minions will feed on your flesh while you suffer but do not die. Never will you be released from the crushing pain of his embrace as you..." I stepped on the phone. Hard. When it still didn't stop, I threw it down the stairs, into the basement, where that pounding noise continued to grow louder. At that moment, all I could think was, that time, I had definitely just taken Tylenol. What the hell is going on in this town? Can anyone tell me? Please. Alright, I hope you all enjoyed this brand new mini Hollow's End story. This one was actually inspired by an episode of Bob's Burgers, which I rewatched recently, as well as a creepy basement doorway in real life. I was initially writing this as a standalone story not based in Hollow's End, but the further I got into writing it, I realized it fit perfectly with the town. Not to mention the unknown threat which was waking up at the end of the last big installment, Hollow's End has a zombie problem. I'm also halfway done working on another long story featuring the sheriff and Randy, so stay tuned for that. If you're not familiar with Hollow's End, I'll include a link to the ongoing story in the Hollow's End playlist, which will appear at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen at the end of the video. If you'd like to have your name featured in a Hollow's End story, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror, or see the link in the description. These folks have already signed up, and some have already been featured in a Hollow's End story. If you're looking for other ways to support the channel, hit the join button to become a channel member for bonus videos and special emojis only available to members. Thanks everyone for watching. See you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 days a week. Hope you have a great day, and there'll be more Hollow's End coming really soon. Bye, everybody.